relational biology and the world's measurement brings forth measurement, language, emotion, and the observer. The movement beyond GDP begins as a measurement correction. It recognizes that societies have mistaken a narrow economic indicator for a civilizational compass. It then proposes broader indicators to make visible what GDP conceals: well-being, equity, sustainability, social cohesion, institutional quality, environmental integrity, and future resilience. This is necessary, but it is not yet sufficient. The deeper question is not only what do we measure, it is what world do our measurements help conserve and reproduce. This is where Maturana's relational biology becomes indispensable. Maturana's work on autopoiesis, structural coupling, cognition, language, emotion, and the observer does not merely add another intellectual tradition to the beyond GDP conversation. It changes the level of reflection. It asks us to look not only at the world being measured, but at the observer who measures. Not only at indicators, but at the distinctions through which indicators arise. Not only at policy, but at the recurring conversations and emotional orientations that sustain a given way of living. From this perspective, measurement is not a neutral mirror held up to reality. Measurement is an act of distinction by observers within a domain of relations. It brings some things forth as visible, relevant, comparable, and actionable, while leaving other things unspoken, uncounted, or outside institutional concern. A society does not merely measure what it values. It also comes to value what it repeatedly measures. GDP brought forth a world of production, consumption, income, prices, sectors, investment, labor, costs, returns, and growth. It did not simply describe that world. It helped organize attention, policy, aspiration, and institutional behavior around it. Beyond GDP widens the field, bringing forth well-being, equity, sustainability, social trust, institutional quality, and natural systems. This is an advance. But a life-coherent framework asks whether even this wider field still conserves deeper habits of control, comparison, management, and institutional self-legitimation. The Maturanan question is therefore not only whether an indicator is accurate, it is also what form of living does this indicator participate in bringing forth. The observer is never outside the world. Modern measurement systems often speak as if the observer stands outside the world, neutrally describing what is there. Maturana challenges this stance. The observer participates in the world through distinctions, language, embodiment, history, and relation. To observe is not to access reality from nowhere. It is to bring forth a domain of reality through distinctions made by a living being within a relational field. This does not mean that reality is arbitrary. It means that objectivity must become responsible. Observers must acknowledge the domain of distinctions in which claims are made. This is especially important for global measurement frameworks because what appears universal may still arise from particular institutional histories, languages, priorities, and forms of power. A national statistical office, an international agency, a ministry of finance, an indigenous community, a caregiver, a child, a coral reef scientist, a farmer, a disabled person, a nurse, a migrant worker, and a future generation do not bring forth the same world. Their distinctions differ because their relations differ. A life-coherent progress framework must therefore avoid pretending that one observer's world exhausts reality. This is why participation is not merely democratic decoration. It is epistemological necessity. Those who bear burdens often know dimensions of reality that official indicators cannot see. Those who live with ecological degradation know things that aggregate environmental accounts may miss. Those who navigate inaccessible institutions know forms of institutional harm that satisfaction surveys may not capture. Those who provide unpaid care know the hidden labor on which formal economies depend. Those who suffer digital exclusion know that technological efficiency may become practical abandonment. The life coherent question is therefore not simply whether indicators are technically valid. It is whether the process of distinction includes the lived worlds of those affected. Indicators are not neutral mirrors. Indicators shape attention. Attention shapes action. Action shapes worlds. A GDP indicator directs attention toward monetized activity. A poverty indicator directs attention toward deprivation. A trust indicator directs attention toward institutional legitimacy. A biodiversity indicator directs attention toward ecological integrity. A loneliness indicator directs attention toward relational life. Each indicator opens a field of concern, but also closes other fields by the limits of its definition. This is why indicators must be treated with humility. They are not reality itself. They are tools for coordinating attention and action. They can reveal, but they can also conceal. They can liberate, but they can also dominate. They can invite repair, but they can also become instruments of control. A life expectancy indicator may reveal population health decline, but it may conceal years lived in pain, disability, loneliness, or indignity. A public service satisfaction indicator may reveal user experience, but it may conceal those excluded before they ever access the service. A work indicator may reveal employment, but conceal exhaustion, wage insufficiency, unsafe conditions, caregiving conflict, and loss of time. A natural capital indicator may reveal environmental asset decline but conceal the intrinsic value and relational meaning of living ecosystems. A subjective well-being indicator may reveal how people evaluate life but conceal adaptation to deprivation or resignation under constrained possibility. The question is not whether indicators are useful. They are necessary. The question is whether they remain answerable to life, or whether life becomes answerable to them. A life-coherent framework treats indicators as servants of collective learning. They must be contestable, revisable, interpretable, and grounded in conversation with those affected. They must point toward life-enabling action rather than become ends in themselves. The emotional ground of rational systems. Maturana's terms languaging and emotioning point to the fact that human beings coordinate ways of living not only through information, but through recurring patterns of speech, feeling, attention, and relation. This matters profoundly for the beyond GDP agenda. Every rational system rests on an emotional ground. What counts as reasonable depends on the domain of concern in which reasoning occurs. Societies do not reason from nowhere. They reason from fear, competition, ambition, care, trust, love, resentment, humility, domination, solidarity, curiosity, or indifference. A dashboard grounded in fear may become a tool of surveillance. A dashboard grounded in competition may become a ranking system. A dashboard grounded in control may become technocratic management. A dashboard grounded in institutional self-protection may become performative reporting. A dashboard grounded in extraction may become a way to optimize continued exploitation. A dashboard grounded in care may become a tool for repair. A dashboard grounded in humility may become a means of listening. A dashboard grounded in love of life may become an instrument of transformation. The same indicator can function differently depending on the emotional world in which it is used. Measuring poverty can become punitive if grounded in suspicion. It can become transformative if grounded in solidarity. Measuring public services can become managerial if grounded in control. It can become reparative if grounded in dignity. Measuring ecological damage can become a compliance exercise if grounded in avoidance. It can become civilizational conversion if grounded in reverence for life. This is why the Life Coherent Health Framework names dignity, equity, justice, solidarity, sustainability, precaution, transparency, accountability, love of life, and humility as necessary ethical orientations. These are not decorative values added after measurement. They shape what measurement becomes. Saheli, 2026. A world cannot be transformed by indicators alone if the emotional ground that uses them remains unchanged. Organism niche relations. Maturana's concept of structural coupling helps move the analysis from measurement to living relation. Living systems do not exist as isolated objects placed inside an external environment. They conserve themselves through recurrent relations with the medium in which they live. Organism and niche are not two independent realities later connected by policy. They arise together through histories of coupling. The Life Coherent Health Framework makes this explicit. Persons live through recurrent relations with food, water, air, microbes, housing, work, care, culture, law, technology, institutions, ecosystems, and meaning. These relations may enable life capacity or disable it. Health is therefore not located solely inside the body, nor outside the body in abstract determinants. It arises through organism niche relations. Saheli, 2026. This insight can be extended to progress as a whole. A society is not an economy plus an environment. It is a living field of relations among bodies, communities, infrastructures, institutions, cultures, technologies, and ecosystems. Economic activity is one pattern within that field. Measurement should not abstract economic activity from the life relations that make it possible and bear its consequences. The organism eats the food system. The child breathes the atmosphere. The worker metabolizes the schedule. The patient carries the institution. The community absorbs the policy. The citizen lives the law. The mind entrains to the digital environment. The body carries the history of exposure. The future inherits the present's decisions. This is the relational ground that GDP cannot see, and that beyond GDP only begins to see. A life-coherent framework asks whether these recurrent couplings expand or reduce life capacity. Legitimate coexistence. Maturana's understanding of love as the domain in which the other is accepted as a legitimate other in coexistence provides a deep ethical foundation for this paper. Legitimate coexistence does not mean agreement, sentimentality, or absence of conflict. It means that the other is not treated as disposable, external, inferior, merely instrumental, or outside the domain of concern. Applied to progress, legitimate coexistence means that persons, communities, workers, caregivers, children, elders, disabled persons, migrants, indigenous peoples, ecosystems, other species, and future generations must not be reduced to externalities, resources, obstacles, data points, consumers, beneficiaries, or costs. They must enter the conversation as participants in the web of life, including those who cannot speak for themselves in ordinary policy forums. This does not mean that every being participates in the same way. Future generations cannot sit at the table. Ecosystems cannot speak in human language. Other species cannot submit policy briefs, but they can be represented through science, ethics, law, precaution, indigenous and local knowledge, ecological observation, guardianship, cultural memory, and humility. Legitimate coexistence requires institutional imagination. This is especially important for beyond GDP because the report's ambition to make visible what GDP conceals is one of its strongest impulses. A life-coherent framework extends this impulse by insisting that visibility must lead to changed relations. The invisible must not merely become data. The voiceless must not merely become indicators. They must become morally and institutionally consequential. Legitimate coexistence therefore asks, who is missing from the conversation? Who cannot safely speak? Who is spoken about but not heard? Who is represented only as cost, risk, or vulnerability? Which ecosystems are treated as background? Which future harms are discounted? Which forms of knowledge are excluded because they are not statistical? Which communities are over-consulted and underheard? A life-coherent conversation begins when these absences become intolerable. From command and control to enabling conditions. Maturana also warns against command and control thinking. Living systems are not machines that can simply be instructed from outside. They respond according to their structure, history, and relational field. This does not mean that intervention is impossible. It means that intervention must be understood as a change in conditions within a living system, not as unilateral control over life. Applied to beyond GDP, this means that dashboards should not become instruments for commanding societies into compliance with externally defined metrics. The goal is not to impose well-being from above. The goal is to create conditions in which communities, institutions, ecosystems, and persons can reorganize toward life coherence. This distinction matters. A command and control approach says, here are the indicators. Improve them. A life-coherent approach says, let us examine together what our way of living is conserving. Let us identify where life is being disabled. Let us create conditions for repair, participation, and transformation. The first approach manages populations. The second transforms relations. The first approach may generate compliance. The second may generate learning. The first approach protects the authority of the observer. The second invites the observer into responsibility. This is why the life-coherent action cycle begins with recognition and renaming, not control. It proceeds through measurement, exposure, de-implementation, restoration of commons, redesign of affordances, protection of margins, coordination, monitoring, and learning. This is not a command sequence imposed on life. It is a method for changing the conditions in which life can respond. The relational upgrade to beyond GDP. The relational upgrade transforms the logic of progress measurement. The conventional logic is measure, compare, rank, manage, report. The life-coherent relational logic is measure, reflect, converse, recoordinate, repair, conserve life. This shift is subtle but decisive. Measurement remains, but it is nested in reflection. Reflection opens conversation. Conversation enables new coordinations. New coordinations make repair possible. Repair allows life-conserving patterns to be sustained. In this sense, the goal is not merely better indicators, the goal is better worlds. The UN Beyond GDP report asks societies to count what counts. A life-coherent framework asks, who is counting, from what distinctions, in what emotional orientation, and toward what form of coexistence? McMurtry asks whether what is counted enables life value. Galtung asks whether avoidable harm is being reduced. Maturana asks what world is being brought forth through the distinctions and relations being conserved. The resulting counsel is clear. Do not measure from domination. Do not govern from fear. Do not consult from superiority. Do not call control care. Do not call adaptation to preventable harm resilience. Do not call extraction development. Do not call market expansion progress. Do not call silence peace. Instead, bring forth a world in which life is recognized, relations are repaired, commons are protected, margins are restored, and all those affected are treated as legitimate in coexistence. The movement beyond GDP, therefore, becomes more than a technical reform. It becomes a transformation in what humanity is willing to conserve. The next section gathers these foundations into the life-coherent framework for progress, a practical architecture that integrates life value, life capital, positive peace, relational biology, exposure repair margins analysis, civil commons, capture detection, and coordinated life-enabling action.